Hi, in part 3 of the Exeter Ship Canal, I'm going to cover the Topsham Ferry, the lockkeeper's cottage and the bridge over the canal at this point of the river. At this point of the river, and subsequently the canal, was for hundreds of years part of a pilgrim's way between Sherborne Abbey in Dorset and Cowick Barton Priory, just to the north of Marsh Barton in the west of Exeter. The monks for centuries travelled this way, crossing the River Exe just past the Passage Inn on Ferry Road in Topsham, and then over ancient footpaths across the marshes to their destination. Consequently, when the canal was extended from Trenchard Sluice to Turf, a bridge over the canal had to be provided at this point. Today, the ferry continues to be used regularly throughout the summer, and the lockkeeper's cottage has been turned into a cafe, and on many occasions that I have spent time here, I've noticed walkers and cyclists arrive here only to be disappointed to find the cafe shut and the ferry not available. However, it is quite a remote spot, but that adds to its charm and attraction. The views across the Exminster marshes and the Holden Hills beyond are truly panoramic. The peace and quiet you can experience with the wildlife all around you can be quite humbling. Whilst I have witnessed many different birds coming and going, I've also seen stoats, and on a recent visit a grey squirrel came running by, stopped to have a look at me, and then went on to investigate the bridge. Went for a drink of water by the canal's edge, then a few minutes later came back the way he had come and disappeared along the towpath. Although there are a few trees in the area, I guess he was gathering food from the hedgerows to store for the winter. I was surprised to see him. The swing bridge here is fairly new, but studying the stonework you can see a lot of skill went into its creation, and would have had something similar when in its original state. These things do wear out over time, and we will have to replace it and will have to be replaced. It does, however, retain its charm. I've noticed canoeists using the stonework as a jetty. The lockkeeper's cottage was home to many people over its long history, owned as it is by Exeter City Council. From time to time it was rented out, and when I first came to the area 50 years ago, I knew a chap by the name of Tom Simmons. I remember him telling me that he had rented it for a while when a young man. And in a recent conversation with a ham radio pal, I discovered that the family of Bob Irish had also lived there at one time. Back in those days there was no electricity connected to the property, and I guess water was from a well. Over the last 6 months I've been to this spot on many occasions, and now that I am concentrating on the history of it, I decided to go back recently to get some more footage. To my surprise, I found that work was taking place to strengthen the canal banks at the entrance of the lock, with steel sheets being piled across the entrance. Apparently the lockkeeper's gates rotted away many years ago and were never repaired. This has caused some problems to the cottage, which is now being leased by a lady who lets it out for holidays for part of the year and uses it as a cafe for a couple of months at the height of the summer. The good old internet will let you have all the details should you wish to spend some time there. Just put in a search in for Topsom Lockkeeper's Cottage. Vivian is her name, and she very kindly lent me a couple of books that she keeps in the cottage. One on the canal called the Exeter Canal, written by Kenneth R. Clue, and the other a book called Talking About Topsom and Fairy Tales of Topsom, as told to Sarah Vernon. Both have references to the cottage in them, and are being a big help to me going forward with my research. So much so that after a little research, I found them both to be available to purchase. So that's what I've done. After reading the book Talking About Topsom, a lot of my personal knowledge about some of the local families has been strengthened. Most of the characters who are mentioned I either knew personally or had talked about by those I knew in particular. Denzo Pym, whom I went salmon fishing with for a number of years, but I also knew Bob Irish and his sons Billy and John. Bob recently passed away last year at the age of 96. He would give you chapter and verse on the wildlife around the lockkeeper's cottage if he could get you to listen. His sons Billy and John were also adept to long explanations as to the finer points of shooting on the estuary. Knowing now what a close relationship they had with the canal, it all makes perfect sense as they have had family links with the lockkeeper's cottage since it was built way back in the 1820s to 30s. If you mentioned anything to any one of them about ducks or guns, it would be a good half hour with their recalling some spectacular event in the past before you could politely retreat. About half a mile back towards Exeter, the M5 motorway was built over the canal. This massive concrete flyover was constructed in 1975, and at that time I was out of work, having taken redundancy from Pankhurst Engineering Company, who I was working for at the time. I remember it well. My son Richard was born that year in the March, and it was in the summer of that year that I was looking for a new job. I saw an advert in the local newspaper. They wanted people with knowledge of steel wire ropes and cables to handle in the construction of the new motorway bridge spanning the river and canal. I fitted that bill, having worked with steel wire ropes when in the Royal Navy as a seaman. The concrete beams have multi-stranded cables running right through the concrete, right across the bridge. It was good pay, but they wanted me to travel up country when this job was finished. I couldn't commit to that, as I wanted to stay in Exeter. So I never took the job. Soon after that, I ended up working on the railway. The canal was for a long part of its early history connected to the river at this point, and known as Philip.Charles Sluice. When the motorway flyover was constructed, all trace of what it was like changed. Apart from a bit of stonework on the side of the canal bank, you wouldn't know any difference to the banks of the canal, or any evidence of the sluice or what it was like. Which is a shame, but that's the way it is, progress. And the motorway bridge, although visually it looks nice, an awful lot of pollution of noise comes from it. Biggest problem we have these days is noise pollution, and for a tranquil setting of the canal, it destroys that. This brings me to the end of this part of the story. My next part will cover the Matford lime kilns, the Countess Weir sewerage works and Countess Weir swing bridge, bascule bridge and road bridge over the A38. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and look out for the next episode. This is 2 Echo 0 Papa Charlie Juliet, now going clear, 7 3s.